bonjour once again, and you got away with done, didn't you, Kazo? Shishak, Jordan, Anishinaabe, Gichida. I really feel good about young leaders like Chris, and we have them in all our communities across America and Canada today that are standing up and stepping forward. A lot of people come up to me and make statements. I wonder what's going to happen when you're gone. You know, what's going to happen when Dennis is gone? I said, I don't even think about it. I don't even worry about it. Because these young people, when I was that age, I wasn't even allowed to be an Indian. Didn't know anything, absolutely nothing. There was absolutely nothing being taught in the public and parochial school systems in America about Indian people, about their culture, their traditional way of life. Nothing was absolutely nothing was said about the contributions that Indian people made to modern day society. When I first day I went to school, I was very confused as a young boy. I walked into the classroom, they had an American flag up. And the first thing we had to do every morning was pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. And on the other side of the blackboard, there was some guy there, he had on black patent leather high heel shoes, had little white nylons on, breeches, little white ruffled shirt, blonde wig, rouge on his cheeks, wooden teeth, I found out later, and they tried to convince me that that was the father of our country. Didn't look anything like my father, Boy George. Didn't look anything like him. My grandfather was White Crane. He was one of the principal chiefs of the great Anishinaabe Nation, stood about 6'3", 6'4". Didn't have an ounce of fat on him. That was my father. So there was confusion immediately. Then they start talking about this. You know, there's a lot of stuff on television today about piracy. You know, Somalis have this ship down and have that pilot, and they've been doing that for years, but all of a sudden it involves an American ship. You know, so now it's news all over the world. You can't turn on a station today without hearing about what's going on off the coast of Somalia. Nothing is said about the greatest pirate in the world, Christopher Columbus. Huh? The guy was so far off his course he thought he was in India somewhere. And that's where we got our name. He made a statement that he came upon a people that were so peaceful. They had no way of cussing or swearing in their languages. They were godlike, he said. They have no use for a Bible. They don't need a Bible. They have no prisons, no guillotines, no hangman's places to hang people, no jails. He said they'll give you anything that you want. Even if you ask them for their shirt, they will take it off and give it to you. That's how kind and loving they were. And he got word back to the Queen. They are perfect for exploitation. And the rest is history. A man by the name of Charles Mann, M-A-N-N, has a book came out about 5 years ago called 1491. And they're finally telling the truth. He did tremendous research. He found out that the United States government actually funded different colleges of learning, universities, churches, anthropologists, archaeologists, and their job was to demonize the Indian people so they could go in and steal what we had left. This is what he said. He says that there's been 120 million Indian people erased from the face of the earth since Columbus landed here. And the conquistadors, the Spaniards, Mexico, Central, South America. 120 million Indian people erased from the face of the earth. Hundreds of tribes that have been totally decimated no longer exist. Everybody thought it was all the talk shows that the author in the book. And they're talking about how different colleges and schools were going to utilize that book, put it into their curricula, and start telling the truth. But not one single institution of learning has endorsed or adopted that book because they don't want their students to know the truth. Because even the doctors and the professors and the presidents and the superintendents of these schools, parochial and Catholic and Protestant and public schools, know absolutely nothing about Indian people. Martin Luther King said, "Only the truth will set you free." But in America, they don't want people to know the truth. They don't want them to know about Governor Kelb up in Newfoundland in the 1500s when they started their western expansion. And he put out a bounty to prove that you kill an Indian. So much for a male, so much for a female. That's all you had to bring is their bodies in. They said they were bringing them in by the wagon loads full. Every day collecting their bounties. And the women who didn't have no rights at that time, Christian women, church-going women, started speaking out about that. And the governor put out a new proclamation to prove that you kill an Indian and collect your bounty. That's all you had to do was bring in their skull. He said they were bringing them in by the gunny sacks full and bushel baskets, wagon loads. It became too expensive once again, too cumbersome. The women started speaking out again. It wasn't the men, it was the women. Christian women, real Christian women that walked in the footsteps of Jesus Christ, started speaking out about those gruesome scenes that they saw every day. And the governor said, if to prove that you kill an Indian, he put out another proclamation. That's all you had to do was bring in a lock of their hair. And now they could scalp men, women, children, little babies, and collect their bounty. That's how scalping began. You know. But they get that, the young people today, they believe everything they see on TV, Lone Ranger, Tonto, John Wayne. They all have this John Wayne frontier mentality, this George Armstrong Custer mentality. The only good Indian is a dead Indian. Nothing is said about the uprising in Minnesota, where I'm from, the War of 1862, one of the most expensive wars ever fought, a short war that lasted only days, when Little Crow and his people stood up when they were going to starve to death. They had smallpox. The state of Minnesota, when they asked for medicine in return for their land that they promised them, the medicine was rotting in the warehouses in St. Paul. And to respond to that cry out for help to fulfill the treaty, they gave them smallpox disease blankets. Nothing is said about whole families that were totally decimated. Nothing is said about the young warriors that went saw this Indian agent in a place called New Ulm in the state of Minnesota. His name was Muldoon. And they told him he was a government agent. If they don't get their medicine, they don't get their food and their farm supplies, that they were not going to make it through the winter. All the medicine was rotting in the warehouses in St. Paul. They wanted to starve the Indian people out and take what land they had left. And they had 10 miles of land both sides of the Minnesota River that they retained for their survival. And that Indian agent told him, as far as I'm concerned, you can eat grass. And they found that agent the next day, and he had a mouthful of grass. Dead. That's how the Little Crow uprising started. And when they surrendered, they turned over 1,200 captives. Never harmed any of them, never raped them, beat them, or anything. They turned them over to the Minnesota Regiment. They promised them that nobody would be tried or punished, and that they would investigate all of these charges they made about the smallpox, these blankets. They charged them all, built large jails, put them in there, put their teepees in. You give them no food or no medicine again. Not even any firewood when the children were freezing to death. And they held military trials in Minnesota. They said not one person spent more than 5 minutes in the courtroom. It was like an assembly line. They came through the courtroom. That's all this one guy, he was a half-breed. He was part black and part Indian. That's all he had to do was sit there and point. I saw that Indian touch this white woman. And they convicted him and sentenced him to death. Over 400 of them were sentenced to death, never killed anyone. On November 5th, it was going to be the most massive hanging in the criminal history of the state of Minnesota and the federal government. They're going to hang all 400 of those people at one time. But they didn't have enough rope. They had to requisition the rope from Fort Leonard Wood, Kansas. And while they went to get that rope, because they wanted to carry the hanging out on November 6th, so they went to Fort Leonard Wood to pick up the rope, enough rope to hang them all at once. An Episcopal bishop named William Whipple went to see old Honest Abe. Went to see old Honest Abe in Washington, D.C., the great emancipator who emancipated and stole millions of acres of Indian land during his presidency. And this bishop sat down with him and went through all those names. I know this, Pammy. They've been converted into the church. I know they didn't do anything like that. And the President Lincoln started scratching their names. And he got all the way down to 38. And the congressional delegation was peppering them, teletypes. Congressional people were coming into D.C. You got to set an example. You got to name. You got to hang these people. If you don't, there's going to be Indian uprisings across the West. They're not going to let all these settlers come in and take their land. They're going to fight back. And Abraham Lincoln stopped at 38, signed a death warrant. By the time the rope arrived, it was almost Christmas time. Peace on earth, goodwill toward men. Huh? They didn't want to wait. They didn't want to do it during Christmas time. So they waited one day after Christmas, and they marched those 38 people out of the stockade in Mankato. People came from all over the world to witness this hanging. They had drums and military drums and bands playing the tubas and everything. Drum roll. And they marched these Indian people out of the stockade, and up above it said, "Peace on earth, goodwill toward men." They marched them up. The only thing that the Indian people resisted was they tried to put a black hood over their head. Try to put a black hood over their head. No, they didn't want that hood. It's a beautiful sunny day. The sun was coming up. And they wanted to look the Creator right in the eye. They wanted to pray. They wanted to sing. So they got the noose around all of them. And then the band started playing and the drums started rolling. And the Indian people struggled around to reach one another so they could hold hands together in a circle like we just had. And they started to sing. They said the drum rolls, everything stopped. It got deathly quiet. The Indian people were being hung and they were going to sing. They were singing their death song. They were being hung and they were going to sing. They were singing their death song. They were willing to die